Tuesday. Of Aleph Elul Tavshin Ayin Dalet. We are in Teres Menachem, Sefer Mamar Nosato Lireiecho in the Mamar Nosato Lireiecho of Yud Gimel Tamas Tavshin Yud Beis. We are on page Shin Lamed Tes, or rather Shin Lamed Ches at the very bottom, the last line on the page.
Is that right?
Yeah, last line on the page. The line starts with the word Me'atzmusoi. We're at the full stop. The Rebbe is explaining what is accomplished through a mitzvah, which is synonymous to that which takes place when a miracle occurs, in that what happens is there's a revelation of Hashem's transcendent light into the usual interior framework of Seder Ishtalshalus. The revelation of Soviv in Memale, the revelation of Das Elyon in Das Tachten, the upper perspective, the higher perspective into the lower perspective. Now the Rebbe explained at length how these two are really inherently unbridgeable, unfusible. And yet, through a miracle, and also through Torah and Mitzvahs, Hashem created a tool called Torah and Mitzvahs, through which we actually draw down this divine light, which is usually transcendent, into the state of existence which is interior and fragmented. How is it possible? And another way of saying it, the Rebbe used the ideas of Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Das Elyon is the upper perspective, is that L'mayla yesh u'lamata ayin, that the true existence, the true being is above, and what is nullified is below, meaning to say that created beings is nullified, are nullified before, are null and void before Hashem. even the divine energy that is vested within them is nullified before Hashem. Whereas the lower perspective is that Lamata Yesh, that the existence is below, we exist, and we refer to our source as Ayin, as nothing, because we cannot grasp it and perceive it. And the Rebbe explained that the lower perspective is a true perspective, although not as true and not as ultimately true as the higher perspective. Then so there are gradations in truth. So how is it, so the Rebbe asked, how is it possible for this higher perspective to fuse with the lower perspective? If the true Yesh is above, and what is truly Ayin, nothing, is below, that's the upper perspective, which is the truest perspective, how can that fuse with a perspective that below is the Yesh, and above is the Ayin, is the nothing? So the Rebbe began to explain why indeed could the Yesh down here below, why created beings can down here below perceive themselves as existence. And not only just as true existence, but existence to such an extent that they do not feel their source, to the extent that they believe, that created beings could believe that their existence comes from themselves. That there is no creator, God forbid. Where does that stem from? That is an expression of Hashem's true existence, because the one who only ultimately truly exists is Hashem, who is Mitziusi Me'atzmusai, whose being, whose existence comes from his very essence, from himself, and he's not dependent on anything else to give him life or to cause him to exist. That finds expression in the mistaken perspective, as it were, of created beings who think and believe that what? That they exist on their own without any creative force bringing them into existence. So that's where we're up to page Shin Lamed Ches on the bottom. So what comes out from this? That there is the power of Hashem himself, Hashem's very essence, not only in the light that creates the Yesh, but also in the Yesh itself. The Yesh himself, the Yesh itself. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, in the Geras HaKodesh Siman Chof, that the one who can create something from nothing ex nihilo is Hashem himself. And although Hashem creates through his light, through his oir, so it's a manifestation of Hashem, it's a revelation of Hashem, and by definition, or as the English word is, perforce, you have to say that it's not the very essence, it's something of Hashem, because Hashem, of course, is much greater than creation. Hashem himself is far greater than anything that we can imagine. Creation is just one aspect. So it must be that it's a gradation, a ray, an emanation of Hashem. But nevertheless, in this ray, in this oir, in this divine light, and of course Hashem creates through the spheres and ultimately through Malchus. But within the oir, there is the power of, Hashem has inserted the power of Atzmos, of his very essence, to create. That's what the Alter Rebbe says in Geras HaKodesh Siman Chof. The Rebbe adds, I have to check if the Alter Rebbe actually says this in Siman Chof, or this is an addition. I guess the Alter Rebbe says it in Siman Chof of Tanya, brings it from other sources here as well. That what? That the expression of Hashem's essence, his power to create, is not only in the oir, not only in the divine light that creates the yesh, but in the yesh himself. In other words, in the actual yesh as he exists, you also find the koyach atzmos. You also find some expression of Hashem's very essence. Where that this idea that Hashem says, "I am the first, I am the last, and besides me there is no God." In other words, that's another way of saying Hashem's very existence comes from his very essence. Nothing precedes him, nothing follows him. He exists independently. He truly exists. So that is nimshich b'yesh, that is drawn down into the created yesh. How? Al yidei ha'ayin shel hayesh amiti, through the ayin of the true yesh. Right? As we said in the upper perspective, the true yesh is the one above, and the ayin is what comes from it. So that point of atzmos, that he exists on his own, and his true existence comes down into the ayin of the true yesh. It's drawn down even further into the ayin of the created yesh, meaning in the creative force that brings the created yesh into being. That aspect of atzmos, that he exists on his own, is transmitted into there and ultimately finds expression in the created yesh, that he feels himself, wrongly, but feels himself as independent existence. So the feeling and the perspective of independent existence that the created yesh has is a direct manifestation of Hashem's ultimate true yesh. So therefore, since there is this aspect of the essence in the created yesh, therefore there is a time that arrives, there is a time that comes when this idea is revealed in the yesh, in its truest sense, in the true sense. Meaning to say that there comes a point where the created yesh, who feels as if he exists on his own, recognizes my perspective is wrong. The one that truly exists on his own is Hashem himself. And that finds expression in his existence below, in the created yesh below. What is the question the Rebbe asked was, how could you draw down the higher perspective into the lower perspective if they're inherently not fusible, not bridgeable? The answer is because there is an aspect of the highest level of the higher perspective, meaning to say, there is an aspect of the very essence of Hashem which finds expression in the created yesh. And that is why they can ultimately be fused and bridged through Torah and mitzvahs and ultimately be revealed. This is the idea of drawing down the higher perspective into the lower perspective. Why? This is because of the power of the very essence of Hashem, which does exist within created beings, albeit in a very concealed or even in a very concealed way, which gives rise to a mistaken identity, so to speak, as if the Nivroim exist on their own. Now that we understand the idea of Das Elin and Das Tacht, the higher perspective and the lower perspective and how they fuse, we can also understand the innovation that comes about through miracles. What is the idea of a miracle? What are miracles? The idea of a miracle is to draw down that which is beyond nature into nature. When one draws down nature, beyond nature into nature, that brings about, that affects an elevation in Hashem's name, Elikim. What is Hashem's name, Elikim? The Alter Rebbe says, if you remember, in chapter 6 of Shari Yichud Ve'emunah, right? He starts with a pasuk. What does he say over there? He starts over there with a pasuk. Shem Elokim is the Shem Midas Agvura Batzimtzum. Hashem's name Elokim is the name which denotes holding back constriction, right? Kishem Shemog and Hashem Elokim, because there's Yud Kei Vav Kei and there's Elokim. Yud Kei Vav Kei is the name which denotes the giving force. Elokim denotes the withholding force. And the Alter Rebbe goes on and actually says, and he quotes and he says, that Elokim is B'gematria HaTeva. The numerical value of Elokim is the same numerical value as the word HaTeva, which is how much? 86, right? So what does it mean? In other words, Elokim denotes Hashem's divine force as it is within nature. That's Elokim. So through miracles, we affect a lifting in Hashem's name Elokim. Which means to say that nature, which comes down, which is drawn down from Hashem's name Elokim, Oile goes up and is included b'Shem Havaya. In Hashem's name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Shelamayla Ma'ateva. Yud Kei Vav Kei denotes what? That power, that godly force, which is beyond nature. As the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it's Hoya Heve V'Yeh Ke'echad. Past, present, and future, all in one. Meaning to say it's beyond time, beyond space, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 6 and 7 in the Shariach V'Emunah. Because what categorizes nature, what categorizes our realm, is time and space. But that which is beyond it is L'mayla Ma'ateva. So that's Yud Kei Vav Kei. This is the idea of fusing the name Adnai and Elokim in Yud Kei Vav Kei. It says in the Kabbalah that through certain things through certain mitzvahs, certain activities that a person does, you cause the fusion of the different names of Hashem in a certain order. One of the ideas of Shiluv means the intertwining, the merging of the names, right? So you have Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is higher than nature. You have Adnai and Elokim, which are both names that denote usual conduct of nature. Elokim is the idea of constriction. Adnai, as the Alter Rebbe goes on and explains in chapter 7 of Tanya, is Malchus. That's the actual creative force as it comes down into created beings, right? So when you fuse Adnai and Elokim with Yud Kei Vav Kei, there's two ways of doing it. You could fuse Yud Kei Vav Kei with Adnai and Elokim, or you could fuse Adnai and Elokim with Yud Kei Vav Kei. What's the difference?
What's Malchus then? I mean, what's Elokim? If Adnai and Malchus?
Elokim is a general term for Teva, or for withholding. In terms of Sfiras, he calls it Gvura. If you want to know the exact delineation, how he separates Elokim from Adnai, you need to read chapter 6 and 7 in Shariach V'Emunah. Because in chapter 6 he focuses on Elokim, and in chapter 7 he focuses on Adnai. Okay? But both of them are strands of, Adnai and Elokim are both strands of the fragmented earth, the memalikal almond, the constricted divine light, divine energy, right? Yud Kei Vav Kei denotes which is beyond that, the divine light, divine energy which is beyond nature, beyond the finiteness of our world, beyond time and space. Now, when you fuse the two, there's two ways of fusing it. You can either fuse Yud Kei Vav Kei in Adnai and Elokim, you can merge it with them, or you can merge Adnai and Elokim with Yud Kei Vav Kei. What's the difference? The difference is which is the dominant name. So, if, for instance, if you fuse Yud Kei Vav Kei and Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, so you can either do Aleph, Yud, Dalet, Hey, Nun, Vav, Yud, and the final Hey. So which is the first letter? Aleph. So in other words, which is the dominant Shem? Which is the dominant name? Adnai. So that denotes Teva. When Adnai is the dominant one, it means you take Yud Kei Vav Kei and you conceal him, and you constrict him, and you give a limited, finite energy to nature, to the world, so it can exist the way it is. But then there's a different shiluv, a different fusion, a different merging, where you merge Adnai and Yud Kei Vav Kei, or Elokim and Yud Kei Vav Kei. So the first letter will be the Yud, the second one will be the Aleph, right? The next one will be the Hey, the following one will be the Dalet, and so on and so forth. Which is the dominant one? The Yud Kei Vav Kei. That means that what's concealed, what's constricted? The limitation, the Adnai aspect. And what's dominant is what? Is the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the beyond nature. So that's what he says here. So when we talk about miracles, it's the idea of Shem Elokim going up. God's name Elokim, which means the name that denotes nature. The godly force which is responsible for nature goes up and is included within Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is beyond nature. In which name? Bahavaya. So who's the dominant one? Yud Kei Vav Kei. Kiyudu, as it is known, Sheyesh Beis Yefani Shiluv, as it is known, there's two ways of merging Hashem's name. Either Shiluv Havaya Ba'adne V'Elakim, where you merge the name Yud Kei Vav Kei and the names Adnei and Elakim. Shezeu Eif Navedet Yichud Tatorah. This is the way of serving Hashem in a manner of the lower unity, meaning to say what? You focus in on the nature, and within there you discover how everything is still united with Hashem, despite the fact that nature exists and creation exists. But the L'maylam is that there's a higher way, Hushiluv Adnei V'Elakim B'Havaya, where you merge the names Adnei Elakim in whom? In which name? In Havaya, in Yud Kei Vav Kei. Which is what? Going beyond nature. That's the idea of Yichudei Allah, the higher perspective, the higher unity. This is by drawing down specifically the higher perspective of Das Tachton and the lower perspective. What does it mean drawing it down? It's not just that you're revealing Yud Kei Vav Kei. You're merging it with Adnei and Elakim. You're not just revealing Yud Kei Vav Kei. You're actually merging it with Adnei and Elakim. That's another way of saying you're drawing down the higher perspective into the lower perspective. Shadas Elyin, but rather not just drawing it down or revealing, not just revealing it, but rather Shadas Elyin Nimshich Mizgal B'das Tachtun. But rather that the higher perspective is drawn down and revealed in the lower perspective. How is that possible? When you're talking about two inherently unbridgeable systems, as it were, this is beyond nature, this is beyond time, this is beyond space, and this is limited necessarily, perforce, by time and space. So how do you merge the two? This is through the power of Hashem's very essence, which is latent within created beings, within the finiteness of the created being, in the sense that the created being feels himself as if he exists on his own, wrongly, but where does that feeling emanate from? From the Koyach HaAtzmos, from Hashem's very essence, who's truly existent on his own, without any cause that causes him to exist, right? So that finds some expression within the created being, within his context as a created being, and that it's at that point where they merge through what? Through the Avodah of Torah Mitzvahs or through the revelations of miracles. So the idea of a miracle is that you lift Shem Elokim into Shem Havaya. This is the meaning, going back to the beginning of the Maimer, the pasuk. This is the meaning of the words in Tehillim when David HaMelech says, "You've given those who fear you a miracle with which to be lifted." Miracles affect elevation, lifting in nature itself. How does it affect the lifting? It affects the lifting because you're raising Shem Elokim into Shem Havaya. What's the purpose of this lifting? For the purpose of the truth forever. What does that mean? Remember, we spoke about the gradations in truth. The purpose of the miracle is to draw down into nature the true perspective. The true perspective is that ve'em is havaya lo'elam. It's a pasuk, right? In Hallel we say ve'em is Hashem lo'elam ha'uluka. But what does it mean? You draw down the ultimate truth into the world. What's the ultimate truth? The emes havaya, not just the emes of Elokim. Emes of Elokim is what? Das Tachten, but that's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is what? Emes havaya, that everything is really bottled. The true existence is only above. So you draw this down into the consciousness of the world. The teva mitzvah Shem Elokim, nature on its own is related to Hashem's name Elokim, which is the constricted, concealed, finite, godly force, even though it's true, because as I mentioned before, Das Tachten, the lower perspective, is also true. As I mentioned to you, Keil Deis Havaya, that the two perspectives, the two Deis are both Keil, are both godly, but nevertheless, it's not the ultimate truth. Through the miracle, but through a miracle, what is drawn down into the consciousness of our existence is, into the framework of our existence is, the aspect of Shem Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei, Shehu Emes Lamite, which is the ultimate truth. That's mipnei koshet tzela. You make miracles. You give miracles to those who fear you, to lift them, so that the ultimate truth could be revealed in the world. That what? That the true Yeshua is Hashem Himself. The who, when we say Shem Havaya, we say Shem Ha'etzem. When we say Yud Kei Vav Kei, it says in Kabbalah, says there's levels in Yud Kei Vav Kei. Ultimately, Yud Kei Vav Kei is Shem Ha'etzem. Right? It's the name that denotes Hashem's very essence is Yud Kei Vav Kei. So Yud Kei Vav Kei at its highest level is a reference to whom? To Hashem Himself. V'lei Shem Atayah, not an adjective, not a descriptive name, and not a Shem HaPoel or a Shem HaPa'ul. If you want to know the exact word for Shem HaPoel, Shem HaPa'ul, I think it's Shem HaPoel is infinitive, and Shem HaPoel is gerundive. Okay, these are grammatical terms of different names that describe different things in different ways. Shem HaEtzem means something that describes the very essence. Nothing that not a name that describes an action or an actor or an activity. So when we say ve'emes havaya la'olam to reveal the truth of Yud Kei Vav Kei in the world, we mean in other words it's another way of saying to reveal Hashem's very essence. What's the bottom line? What comes out from all of this? What's the sum total of all of this? Through miracles, through miracles, we draw down the very essence of Hashem's very being, of Hashem's infinity, into our state of consciousness. And now, the next section, which we will continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, the Rebbe is going to explain that we learned there was another pshat in Nes, not only miracles, it also means tests or trials. What's the connection between that and trials?
So what are these other shames? Shem HaTorah, Shem HaKol, Shem HaKol.
Elikim, Adnai, different names of Hashem that denote different manifestations of Hashem. Whereas Shem Havaya, in the ultimate sense, refers to the very essence of Hashem. Tomorrow we will learn the connection between miracles, the definition of Nes as a miracle and Nes as a trial, as trials and tests.